Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book from Edward Elgar, who are an independent publisher based in Cheltenham. They produce a series of practical guides. This is one of them. It's called Art, Law and the Business of Art. And it's been written by Martin Wilson. It's available as a hardback, a paperback and an ebook. I decided I would do the review of this book, having had a chat with Elizabeth about it. We've reviewed a few books within the art world, specifically looking at restitution because of looting, and I've done a number of reviews concerning the books looking at that particular problem. But this is a much bigger book, and it's about art law. So I've given the title "The Business of Art and the Law, Concisely Explained in this excellent short practical guide from Elgar." And as I say, Martin Wilson is to be congratulated on producing a first-class work. Let's just have a look at it. It's a paperback. I know we've got the teddy bears from the Supreme Court and so forth looking at me. That's from an earlier review. This is the book. It's a paperback. There's the front, there's the spine, and then there's the back. You can probably see a little bit of information there. Now, in the back cover, on the cover, you've got some information about Martin and what he's been doing. I'm not going to go into too much detail. And on the front, you've got a little bit about the book itself. I borrowed the quotes as well. I've borrowed from some of the information given, but I've used mainly the information in the book itself. That's the actual index at the back by page numbering, and it's quite a substantial index, which you can see starting there. So you should be able to find what you're looking for. You do have paragraph numbering, which you can probably see there, and obviously limited amount of footnoting, not too much. He hasn't gone over the top at all with the footnoting, which I'm grateful for. There's the information about the actual Elgar practical guides. We've reviewed a few of them in the past, and they are extremely helpful for us as practitioners. And I think this book, of course, has a much wider appeal than just limited lawyers. It's for a much wider audience, hence the fact it's a practical guide. There's the front page there. Then we get on to the blurb from Elgar. Then you've got a content overview, and you can see what we've got here with the various pieces of information. You start off with the preface, notes and glossary of terms. I'll get onto those. Then you've got 18 different chapters, and then at the end you've got an index. Then there's a table of contents in much greater detail with paragraph numbering, which is quite helpful. It looks at a whole range of different areas. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Do read the preface, because that sets the scene very nicely from Martin. Then after that you've got a little notes area. Again, I've quoted a little bit from there. And then you've got a glossary of art terms, which I thought was very helpful, bearing in mind that you're entering a bit of a different world, actually, with the art world, the connoisseurs. And I'm not meaning that in any rude way at all. I'm just saying that obviously there are specific terms that are used which you may not know exactly what the words mean. Written bids and absentee bid, commission bids, things like that. Gives you a little bit of a definition, and I think that's very helpful. Then we've got case law, UK case law to begin with, a lot of case law, US, United States of American case law. Then you've got legislation, of course, EU legislation and so forth, United Kingdom legislation. Then you've got international legislation. Then you get to the first chapter, the artist and the artwork. And when an artist produces a work, he or she creates something unique, a combination of the artist's imagination and a tangible way of expressing that imaginative idea. Now, that sums up a lot of what it's about. Read the book. It's a lovely book to read because it's very easy. And then you've got, for instance, you've got some of the points he makes. You've then got some examples given of some of the points he's making, if it's difficult. Because I will say one thing, without saying too much, because you should read the book itself. It only runs to 400 pages. But one of the things I think you should be careful with is that art law, the law of art, auctions, they hold a special area when it comes to law. So don't go into it with preconceived ideas, because I think one of the problems I've certainly found in I haven't done very much in this particular area of law, but I do find that the word of warning is probably a good idea, because what you might think might be the case is not necessarily the correct approach. And I say that for a number of reasons. You're dealing sometimes with stupendously large sums of money, so you've got to be aware of how the subject matter is approached. Well, what do I say then? Because I discussed it with Elizabeth, and I've actually written this. I said, well, it's a fascinating short practical guide from Elgar, written by leading art and cultural property lawyer Martin Wilson. It's called Art Law and the Business of Art. It's a work of art in itself, I've said. And as Wilson says, whilst the art market is international, this book is firmly focused on the law and practice in the United Kingdom. It doesn't look at the laws and practices of other countries or specific areas such as tax and export controls, which frankly are specialist in any event. So we've got, if I can again say, use an expression, a broad brush approach to actually what art law is really about in 2020. And for those relatively new to this field, the sale of art takes place through a variety of channels, using intermediaries on quite a few occasions and covering all value levels. In other words, some very small sums of money to very large sums of money. And Wilson's intention is to give us a practical and at times general overview of the subject. I think he succeeds very well with his aim. Now, do read the preface, as I've indicated, before you embark on the main text, body text. It's got 18 chapters, about 400 pages, and the useful index at the back. And it's an easy read. I didn't find it difficult. Obviously, there are some bits that are more heavy than others, but generally I found it fascinating. And I say that because it's dealing with some serious issues, which we're going to get into. Wilson says that the value of any artwork depends upon its authorship. That's a matter of expert opinion, where the author died long ago. Of course, you've got experts. So you've got CPR to think of and all sorts of other things, the Expert Witness Institute and so forth. Then you've got authenticity, again often a question of opinion. That's to the expert. It's provenance, a question of research and detective work. In other words, the tracing back. We use tracing, of course, in equity, and we tracing back and seeing who's got what title and so forth. Then we get to the key bit, the right and ability of the owner to sell the work, which is a question of law, because it's who has the best title. It's good title. Think law of contract and think about the basics of it. And the condition of the work. Defects are often sometimes obvious, but can be hidden. So that's important to remember, those particular basics, covered in right at the beginning of the book. The author then goes on to say that the decision to purchase an artwork and of the price at which it is acquired are also a complex mix of emotion and judgment. Interesting choice of words here. Just the right mix, in fact, for lawyers, I'm suggesting. And he adds, of course, that the mix is often made without the kind of due diligence investigation which would accompany the purchase of a company or of real estate. Because you think of what you have to go through. I mean, I do due diligence regularly with my clients because I do public access work. But again, I do have to do quite a lot of checking to make sure I know what I'm dealing with. And therefore, again, this is one of the difficulties sometimes, because it's not the same approach that you would adopt when it's looking at art law that you might adopt in company law, corporate governance, whatever you want to call it, or in real estate, the law of property. Now, another important point for all of us who read this excellent guide is that artists and their representatives have a continuing interest in their works of art and often strong opinions about how they're sold, thus making the area fertile ground for legal complexities. That's where we come in, of course. Other factors are also mentioned, excuse me, including the thorny issue of restitution of looted art, an area I've certainly been championing, antitrust litigation and the growth of complex financial transactions surrounding art, and of course the additional growth in value of the art sold in recent decades. And as I'm recording this, I've just seen the sale of a newly discovered Lowry, far higher than anybody really thought. When I saw the estimate, I thought it was way under, and of course it was a lot more money. Not surprising, depending on what you do, whether you like L.S. Lowry or not. doesn't matter for you, but personally I like Lowry, and I thought, yes, that's going to sell for a lot more. It's only my opinion, of course, but there again, as I said earlier, we're dealing with expert opinions quite often in this area. Let me bring together, finally, the points that we're making, together with the issues of ethical and public policy which surround the sale of certain types of artwork. This book, I think, is a first-class short statement on the business of art law, where Wilson achieves his stated aim of putting the law firmly in the context of the business. And we consider it's an excellent primer, of course, for anyone interested in the modern art world, as a short, succinct yet detailed trip around the merging area of art law, or probably more like the emerging area of art law, although art law, of course, merges a number of different areas of law into what is now, I think, probably going to become a substantive law area in its own right. And the paperback edition of the book appeared on the 11th of November, and as I say, there is actually an ebook and a hardback. This is the paperback. There it is again, front, spine, and then the back. You can see the back. And I'll open it in the middle. I don't know what to come up with. Auctions, online auctions. There we go. Quite interesting, actually, from a lawyer's point of view, because he's a lawyer, of course. He's a very experienced man. He's a leading art and cultural property lawyer. This is cultural property. Auctions are always, you'll go back to your law of contract years when you first started and think about auctions and how a contract is made, and then you look at that. It's quite interesting. Perhaps I'm a bit of a bore, but I found it quite interesting. Then private sales of art are covered and so forth. All the fun of the fair, basically. You've got everything you really want in this book, and it was a real privilege when Elgar asked me to review it. So thank you to everybody concerned, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see another edition of this book before too long. Thank you to all. Bye-bye.